So thanks for coming and seeing my talk. I always find the start of the talk the hardest part. So I wanted to start this one with just a little story. So I went to this conference about a year ago, maybe a year and a half. It was called DevOps Days, like a really awesome event. It wasn't an infosec conference. It was a DevOps conference. So I wanted to go to get a slightly different perspective of things. And there was a guy giving a talk, and he said, "Who here is in security?" So I put my hand up. So a few other hands go up around the audience. And then I heard someone from the back just go, "Boo." And to me, that kind of, that told me what some of these other teams think about infosec, right? Infosec is often blockers. We're there to say, you can't go live, or your application is broken, or you can't do this, and you can't do your job. And actually, I found this image online. I don't know who made it, but it says something, right? Even security sees security as the bad guy. So I wanted to try and think about ways where we could stop security from getting in the way, stop security from being a blocker. And can we instead turn security into an enabler? I think the answer to this is, at least something else, is automation. Because once we can start to automate security, we can start to integrate security. And when it's integrated, it actually becomes a part of a company's ethos and their culture. So just quickly, who am I? I'm Jamal Harris. Some people might know me as Jay. I'm a pen tester for Digital Interruption. So this is the company I started with Saskia right here. We do penetration testing, but also one thing we're trying to focus on is more of this like DevSecOps type approach to security. So we're developing new tooling and methodologies that developers can use. Personally, I'm interested in things like mobile application security. I really like reverse engineering, software-defined radio as well. I've given a couple of talks on SDR. Some Twitter accounts that I think are worth following. Obviously me, but also Manchester Grey Hats. So this is a group I run in Manchester where we put on, kind of workshops, free workshops on all kinds of topics. And I get a lot of help from some of the Manchester infosec scene there, which is pretty awesome. We compete in CTFs and we run CTFs as well. And then DI Security is our company Twitter account where we publish our research and things. So if you want to keep an eye on, what kind of things we're releasing as a company, check that out. I'm not a developer, as you can see here. I'm mostly looking at things from a security point of view and thinking, how can I use my skills to help development? Before moving into security, I was a software engineer, so I think that's maybe why I have a slightly different perspective compared to a lot of other pen testers that I speak to. So, why did I want to do this talk? Well, after speaking to some other pen testers and a lot of my friends, they always tell me, man, I hate pen testing. Pen testing sucks. I want to go work in Sainsbury's instead. And I totally get it because I felt the same way after doing pen testing for a little while. It's actually really boring, right? Anyone here that's an experienced pen tester knows that we spend a lot of time looking at the same types of things. There's only so many times finding cross-site scripting is going to be interesting. And I really hate being bored. And pen testing, can be kind of boring. Writing low-risk issues as well. So when I'm on a test and I find all these kind of low-risk, HTTP headers not set, or things like that, I've got to put those in the report. And that means that the report takes a long time to write because there's loads of those issues. Which takes me on to the next point. No one's going to fix those, right? If you're a developer, you get a report of all these low-risk issues, then they're not worth fixing. As the pen tester, I need to report those because there's still a risk involved with them. So I need to put those in the report. Need to spend the time writing the report, knowing that no one's going to read it. So it's actually really demotivating. So from the pen tester side of point of view, we think that is kind of of limited value to some organizations. And the fact that we still have vulnerable software kind of it proves that, right? Companies are still getting breached even though they get pen testing. So pen testing, kind of sucks. From the developer's point of view, again, the reports get padded all these low-risk issues. So they're paying a small fortune to have someone come in and then do a pen test. And what they get back is, a 50-page document that says, we found that the cookie flag wasn't set, or some very convoluted vulnerability that's not actually exploitable. Because we don't understand the context of the vulnerabilities. So when I'm on the test, I might be there for a week, maybe 2 weeks or something. I don't really understand much about what the application actually does. So I can only rate things based on my kind of experience at the time. And that doesn't necessarily fit in with the reality of what the organization needs. So I might risk something as a high risk, but actually the organization might have controls in place that turns it into a low. And I'm not going to know that. All the developers are going to see is a pen test report with a high risk issue that is actually a low risk issue. Or it could be the other way around. I might raise something as a medium when actually it's, business critical to them. As an example, I was doing a test on a mobile application where I managed to disable this security control that, to me, it didn't really seem that important, but this was a big part of how the company made money. So once they saw that, they started to kind of freak out. And I would have only raised it probably as a low because it was a very simple control that I didn't really see was doing much anyway. There's a lot of ego in security and in infosec. I was on site with a colleague of mine. This was a few years back. So he's honestly one of the most skilled hackers and pen testers in the UK. But we were on site together and we were doing a code review. And he just starts kind of mocking the developer, like, this developer, you can't believe you had this vulnerability, look what I found, blah, blah, blah. And the dev was sitting right behind us. So again, imagine you're the developer, you've got to work with infosec, and you're working with people like that. We have a lot of ego and we're hard to speak to. And also, I think a lot of developers understand that they can't stop development, right? They need to release on time. That is the priority. When security comes in and says you can't go live, well, the developer says, well, you know what? This is what's making the company money. So there's always going to be this friction between pen testing. So we don't like it as pen testers. Developers don't like it because it doesn't provide them too much value. There's also this problem where people don't even really know what a pen test is. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen, maybe in an email or something, pen test report with a capital PN as if it stands for something. Because I see it a lot from my clients. Which just kind of points out to me that people don't actually know what a pen test is, right? They just know that they need one. I was speaking to this client recently, and we were going through the scoping process, and he said, so how long will this take? And I said, about 5 days. This is quite a basic web app. He said, 5 days? That's a long time. So do you press go and then you get the results back 5 days later? I'm like, no, there's no hack button. It's like 5 days of doing things. But he honestly had no idea what a pen test entailed. He knew, or at least he'd been told that he needed to get one. And also we can't, even in the industry, we can't always agree with what a pen test is. Red team, vuln scan, vuln assessment. These things, if you speak to any pen tester, they're going to have a slightly different way of thinking about it or describing exactly what that kind of test is. So we're confused. Our clients are confused. We say that pen tests don't really provide value. They don't really want pen tests anyway because of all the things I spoke about before. So we're going to just look at this fictitious company and a bit of a case study, and they're called Talk Squared. So they have a number of applications. I'm glad somebody got the joke. So a number of applications, web applications, and one of them was breached. Okay. Well, they had a pen test. So how could something like this happen? If they have a pen test, surely they're secure. And again, I'm going to point out that this is more of a fictitious thing.
Was it on a server that wasn't in the scope?
So actually, I don't really speak too much about scope here. Yeah, but scope is actually a big thing. Pen testing is. I'm actually add a slide about that for the next time I do this. So fictitious company, they have web applications. One of them was breached. So they have a more traditional development style, right? So they go through this waterfall methodology, which I'm sure everyone or most people here will be familiar with. Basically, we start by gathering requirements, design the application, implement it, and then this is when testing occurs. So once the application is implemented and finished, then they get tested. Now, this isn't just security testing. This is going to be quality assurance testing as well. And actually, at this point, sometimes this is kind of the end because the company realizes they don't have enough budget for security, so they can't do anything. But in this case, let's kind of assume that they do get a pen test. And then only after that will they deploy. Like, as I said, sometimes in the real world, there really isn't enough budget to complete the security testing, which is a real shame. So we looked at traditional development methodologies, and so let's look at what I would do in a more traditional type of pen test. I would go on site, which I quite enjoy. To be honest, I get to wear a suit. I feel like a grown-up, which is pretty cool. So I get on site. I then have to usually go to kind of reception and, go through security, get a badge. Then I wait. My contact will come meet me, and he will show me where the toilets are. I show him where the coffee is. I finally get to sit down. I get my IP address that I need to test, or the application, or whatever. And then I got to wait for credentials. And the worst I've seen this is I was on site with 3 other consultants. We were there for 5 days, which is a 20-day engagement. And we spent the first 3 days waiting for credentials. So the 15 days of the test gone. So we wait for credentials. We do some testing when we can. Wait for some more credentials, test a bit more. Eventually we leave, and then we send over a PDF report at the end. We're there, spend a lot of time, we're distracting people, writing reports, etc. Developers tend to feel like this every time we find a vulnerability, right? Because they don't want us to find things. So we're there. Every time we find something, they know that they've got to address it or fix it, or it's going to affect their deadlines. It's going to make them look bad. The companies are kind of throwing money at the problem. Pen testers have large day rates. Anytime we find issues, the deadlines get pushed. The organization has to decide whether they accept the vulnerability or whether they need to know how to manage it, and etc. They're just throwing money away. But as a consultant, it's totally kind of fine from my point of view. So let's take this company and say that we've done the pen test and we found some vulnerabilities. We have some critical vulnerabilities such as remote code execution or SQL injection. The client-side prices are trusted. So in this fictitious application, let's say that it's some kind of e-commerce site. If it's trusting prices from the client, that's a big deal. And then, a load of issues that I would say are high risk, such as, coupons might be guessable or lack of authentication on some pages. There's always a ton of medium risk issues. Not everyone here would necessarily agree that all these are medium, but that's kind of one of the problems, right? The way that I rate the vulnerabilities is fairly subjective. I think about what I think it should be as a risk. So but there are some techniques to make them more objective. So there's like CVSS scores and things, but then these have their weaknesses as well. They don't always capture the right details. So sometimes, I might rate something as medium when other pen testers wouldn't. Or maybe I would even rate it as a different thing on a different day, Sometimes it's just like, probably medium. And then loads of low risk issues. So what we're going to try and do is let's see if we can take these issues and see how many of those we can automate away, okay? Or we can automate so that you no longer will find them during a pen test. But before we do that, hands up if you would have gone live with this pen test report. So if you had an application with all these vulnerabilities, would anyone go live with it?
Why?
No? Why not? Yeah, and you know what? The reality is I see that most companies, they will go live when they know that there are vulnerabilities because, again, they have to make money, and making money is their priority, which it should be. It kind of makes sense. So I've definitely been in situations where we've delivered similar reports to this, and there's no choice but to go live. There's always the idea that they will fix the vulnerabilities later, but that rarely happens. And in fact, I remember this one time I was doing a test, went back 6 months later, and did another test for them, like the same application that had the same issues. It's like, did you address anything in the last pen test? What happened? They're like, there was a pen test before. So I think what happened is the teams had changed. The PDF report that we send through, which is the way we do pen tests normally, must have just got lost in someone's inbox. So they had no visibility of that at all. So they had no idea that a pen test had even happened 6 months prior. So the solution, I think, is we can't ignore security, right? That would be a problem. So we need to put it into the hands of the developers and the testers already in the team. So we will left shift it. Right? We'll try and push it closer to the beginning of the development process. So there should be more security testing earlier. So it's cheaper, which is fantastic. But also there are different ways to test when it's earlier. So for example, unit testing, and we'll look at that in a bit later. But a unit test is not something that I'm necessarily going to do as part of a pen test, but it is totally one of the ways that developers test their applications. So let's look at requirements and design part of the methodology. I'm kind of cheating putting these two things together, but I think they're related. So we're going to see if we can integrate security in the requirements and the design part of the application development. So firstly, what I would say is for some applications, you might decide actually you don't really care about security, and that's fine. If it's an internal application maybe that has no user data, or maybe only trusted users can use it, it probably doesn't need that much security involved with it. So don't worry about it. Focus your efforts on other things. If it's a fintech application, something that's public, something that handles payments, something that's likely to be attacked, these are the applications where we need to add more budget to do security tests and do them earlier. And you probably need a pen test as well in these cases. But the thing is, it should be an informed decision. You need to understand your application, to understand whether it should be tested or not. And so I kind of I tried to put this in a bit of a graph, right? So if it's something that's down here on the green side, forget about it. If it's going up towards more the red side, you want to add more security budget. More budget should be used for security. And it's kind of relevant to each company's risk appetite as to where they want to place their application. So, first thing, let's think about kind of the ways that we can discover threats. We want to be able to think like an attacker. So, in the design stage, we want to say, okay, so how might an attacker abuse our applications? And there are a few different techniques we can use. So we have threat modeling. This is where we start to decompose and understand the application, where we want to try and determine the threats and determine the countermeasures that we want to do. And this will be more like a brainstorming activity, right? So we'll sit down and try and model the threats of the application. Think about what an attacker might be able to do, where the attackers will be coming from, what assets are they going to be after. I really like abuse stories. Don't really like the name. It's weird to have to Google abuse stories. But so this is more like in fact, we'll talk about this on the next slide, so I'll come back to it. One thing that I'd also recommend is looking at previous pen test reports. Oftentimes, there may be some common vulnerabilities to an organization. So if you're developing an application and you've had previous pen tests done, take a look at those, try and understand those. Maybe there's a library that has been used a lot that's introducing vulnerabilities, or maybe there's just certain coding practices that is kind of inherent within that company. So if you can identify those by reading previous pen test reports, you have another way of thinking like an attacker to try and improve the next design. Training, of course. If you go on security training, send your team on security training, your developers and your testers, then they will have an understanding of how pen testing works and how security testers will go about looking for vulnerabilities. And I will say, this might be a good place to bring in external help. So if you do need to use external consultancies, security firms, do it right at the beginning rather than right at the end, which is the more traditional way. Have them come in and help you to brainstorm threats to your applications. So with abuse stories, they're kind of like user stories in Scrum, but more from the attacker's point of view. So what you can say is, as an attacker, I want to log into the application without knowing the password. And you can document these, and you can just get a list of as many as possible. As an attacker, I want to get free stuff. Or as an attacker, I want to change the ranking of specific products, right? So we have a way of documenting the things that an attacker might want to do within the application. And of course, with each of these, they can be broken down further. So as an attacker, I want to log into the application without knowing the password. Well, we can brute force it, right? We might be able to use SQL injection to bypass the authentication mechanism. Maybe there's a password reset for another user. So these things we've broken down. And again, this should be something that's done with the team it should be done with a brainstorming session, try and understand as many ways that an attacker might be able to abuse the system. So in theory, if we did this properly and then designed our application based on this, on these abuse stories, there would be no vulnerabilities. But of course, there will be implementation issues that we need to address later. So one thing that I like is security requirements, right? When applications are developed, there need to be this requirements document where they lay out what the application should do. Very rarely do I see security requirements added to that list. So if we start to add things such as all web requests should be over HTTPS, this becomes a requirement of the application. So now a good application, an application that meets the requirements, a finished application, is a secure application because we've added the security requirements into what complete looks like. And we can use some of the previous techniques we saw to add these security requirements. So with security requirements, what we try to do is we define design problems early on. Okay, so we've looked at the requirements design stage. We thought about how we can try and add security to that. About implementation, how we're going to try and add security into the actual coding side of things. I think it's really important to embed security knowledge inside the team. Again, with training, right? So if we have developers and testers understanding what security is, they have another kind of tool to be able to use to test for security vulnerabilities. And they have the knowledge to write good code, right? Secure code. Pairing is I really like this technique. So with pairing, you might have two developers sitting in front of the same keyboard, actually coding together. And if one of those guys or girls, people, if one of those, I got told off last time for using guys. So if one of those coders has security understanding, then they will actually be able to almost train the other one. Because, so one person goes to write some code and, for example, they add SQL injection. The other person sitting there and doing the pairing exercise, they will be able to say, oh, actually, there's a vulnerability there. You need to change it this way. Then the knowledge kind of being spread within the team. The advantage is once the pairs change, now you've got two people that understand security. And so their pairs will understand it as well. So it kind of mixes, the security knowledge mixes within the team in a very, very kind of non-threatening way. Security SMEs, so subject matter experts. Actually, I would like to see more companies hiring people to be the subject matter expert in the team. So this will be someone that they can actually, developers can actually go to and ask questions like, hey, like what happens if I do this? Or what's the best way to do this? Or what's the risk of, handling something this way? So this is it should be a dedicated role that I think is really, really important. Rather than just either having to Google it or guess it or bring in expensive external contractors. Security champions. So this is slightly different from an SME. This will be someone that's actually part of the team, someone that's maybe a developer as well. And they're the person that you're highlighting as the person that wants to be more involved with security. I think it's actually really important because when I was a software engineer, I was really interested in security, and the only way I could really do security stuff was to become a pentester. It would have been awesome if they would have said, hey, you know what, you're interested in security. How about you're the security champion? We'll send you to security conferences. We'll, add training around security. Then they would have had my security knowledge inside the dev team, which would have been great. And I've seen some of my friends as well have similar backgrounds where they were developers. They wanted to do security stuff, and the only solution they had was to become a pen tester because where they worked didn't give them the flexibility to do more security things. Security code review is a good way to embed security into the team. So lots of places, they will have some code review process before code gets checked in or used. And if we're looking at that from a security point of view as well, then that's a really good way to pick up security issues and also to embed this idea of quality, security quality inside the code base. So developers are actually quite proud of the code they write. And one of the problems is that security has never really become a metric of quality for a lot of them. So once that happens with things like code review, then security becomes a measure of quality, and then because they want to be proud of their code, there will be fewer vulnerabilities, and they'll understand security issues a bit more. Has anyone heard of ChatOps before? Yeah, so I came across this time recently. I really like it. I worked at a place doing internal pen testing for a quite large company, and there was a lot of the developers use Slack. And I turned to the guys in security and said, "Is anyone here on Slack?" And they were like, "Nah, why would we be on Slack? It's just developers, and the whole team is here anyway, so we don't need to." I'm like, okay, fair enough. And I went on Slack, and I answered more security questions in Slack than I did any other way. There was the assumption in the security team that if the developer had a question, they would call us up or send us an email or something. But the reality is, they would mostly just ask the question on Slack and hope somebody would answer it. And by having someone in the Slack channel who understood security, we're actually able to really help them in a way that made sense for them. And of course, conferences. I think conferences are really important, both from infosec. So if you're working with developers, send them to infosec conferences. They'll learn a lot. But also, I think us infosec people should go to more developer conferences and try and, it's great if I can talk to other security people about what I do, but it's better if I can speak to developers about what I do and get them to understand why security is important. Okay, so developers, they know that they want to add security in. Developers know how to test their own code. And there's this really useful technique, unit testing, where we write code to test our code. I very rarely see security tests done at unit testing, at the unit testing level, which is a shame. So if we can try and integrate security tests into unit testing, that again, we have a different way of testing for security vulnerabilities. So what might a unit test for security vulnerability look like? Well, given an attacker can submit a username and password, when they try more than 5 incorrect passwords, then the account should be locked. So this is following more of like a BDD or behavioral-driven development approach to unit testing. But we map out our requirements that we saw earlier. We can map those out to statements like this. And when we have a statement like this, we can turn it into some code. Now, this is not good code. It probably won't work really for the unit test, but we can see that we're setting up the application the way that we want. We're doing some kind of action to try and log in 5 times, and then we check if the account is locked. So now we have a way that every time the application is built, this test will run, and the developer instantly knows whether the application is vulnerable to brute forcing accounts. And I think the real advantage here is that it is run every single time that the application is built. So we've got some implementation stuff. And what about moving on to the testing side of things? What I would say is we have tons of hacker tools for hackers, right? I think we need fewer of those. We need more hacker tools for developers and testers. Things like Burp Suite and SQL Map and kind of Nmap, awesome tools for a pen tester. But they don't really make too much sense for other people because they don't work in a way that makes sense for the way that they work. Like as an example, I remember there was this open source tool, like really cool. I use it a lot for in-pen tests, and the company that created it, they tried to make a pro version of it, and they added a GUI on top of it and said, okay, now it's a pro version for developers, and no one bought it because it wasn't how developers wanted to use the kind of software and how they wanted to test their code. What they want is something that's more like this. So it needs to be something that has an API, something that can be integrated into the build system. So when the application is built, with Jenkins, for example, Jenkins can then kick off scans, collate results, and then give back a pass or fail to the developer. They don't necessarily want something that has a command line tool with a cool hacker banner in it. And actually, I did this a few years ago. I took a pen testing tool that I use quite a lot, and I added a wrapper around it so that it could be run from Jenkins. Added a plugin in Jenkins, and this was actually kind of cool because what it meant is that when I built an Android application, it would run these checks automatically. And if the application had the vulnerabilities, the build would fail, and I'd get kind of instant feedback about that. And if the tool found there were no vulnerabilities, then the test would pass and the application would build successfully. I did write a blog post about this, which you can see on our website, I think. We've actually expanded that since then, and we're actually developing this kind of like larger tool around this. We do have a web interface to make things easy, but really the core of it is this API. That means that the web interface might change. Maybe you can run it from Jenkins, or you can run it from the command line if you want, because it's just a web API. But this is the way that I think security tools should evolve to, something that is programmable, something that can be controlled via an API, because this is how developers want to test their code, and this is how they can test their code. So there are a few different types of security tooling. SAST is static code scanning tools. So what they'll do is they will take a code base and they will just scan the source code for vulnerabilities. It uses pattern matching or something like taint analysis, where it says, okay, here's the input, here's the output, and the input is like coming from a web request, and the output is going into like a database, for example, and nothing's happening in the middle, so therefore there's probably SQL injection. So it will scan the application for vulnerabilities, but again, scan the source code. Nick Jones gave a good talk about this at DevSecCon a few years back, and there's tons of tools that do this kind of thing, but unfortunately a lot of them are really expensive. The open source ones tend not to be so great, unfortunately. Then you got DAST, which is more dynamic testing. So with DAST, is running test cases against a live application. This can be kind of harder to set up in a way, because you need to have the live application there and working before you can start running the test cases against it. But think about when you're running like Scanner in Burp Suite, for example, or something where it's actually sending off requests to the application, doing some test, and then saying, okay, there's a vulnerability here. These tools exist, but they need to be made kind of aware of the application, and they need to understand what risks, they need to understand kind of how the application works to be really effective. But they can be slightly better for logic flaws compared to SAST tools. And then IAST is pretty like a new way of doing it. But this is cool. It's kind of like DAST, where it's doing dynamic stuff, but it's using instrumentation. So you have an application maybe that's running, and the IAST tools will hook it and then add security checks on the background. The advantage is you can have your normal test cases running, or you can just use the application. And because these tools work by hooking the application that's running, it is almost doing security tests for free, which is really awesome. But there are some downsides as well. So we've automated security, all good. We've got our DAST and our SAST tools. We can finish, right? Unfortunately, it's not quite as easy as that. Scan times can be an issue. So I took a kind of a vulnerable application and run Zap and Burp Suite against it. The scan times were not super useful. Took way too long. Something that people don't really want to add that to their build times. I tried running the version 2 of Burp against the same application, and it found I don't think it actually finished the scan. It just didn't know how to handle the application. So it could be quite naive to just say, run a scanner and you'll get all the results. You do get some good things, right? So you do find a lot of stuff, but it doesn't find everything. And again, you need to be able to tune the tool properly to really get the most advantage out of it. I've seen so many development teams just take Zap, for example, and they just put their URL into Zap, hit scan, and then they assume that's going to give them full coverage of the application. And it doesn't. It needs to be set up properly so that it understands authentication and knows which pages to use and all kinds of stuff. It could take a long time to configure it correctly, and many dev teams don't do that. So with QA testing, again, we can try and add security into this as well. QA testers can be really good at automating tests, but often they ignore security. I was speaking to a tester once, and she said to me, I asked, do you do security testing as part of your normal testing? She said, security isn't our job. So, okay. Well, actually, it's kind of everyone's job. Interestingly, like a month or two ago, she messaged me and said, I was totally wrong. Security is everyone's job. And it's awesome that she's actually changed her mind and understands that security is totally accessible and it's something everyone needs to take responsibility for. And it means that they can use the techniques that they use to test to do security tests, which, again, normally would just happen during a pen test. And if we can use them to help us with automating our testing as well. So if we have the security requirements that we looked at the beginning, we can actually turn these into test cases, right? It will be easier for a QA tester to take these test cases and make a test. And they don't necessarily even need to understand the ins and outs of security. They can make a test case to see that all requests are going over HTTPS without understanding why that's important. And what that means is these are going to be fewer vulnerabilities that I find in a pen test. And actually, I got this message from somebody recently. I gave a talk it was a workshop on mobile application security testing at a conference called Test Bash. And I gave a talk. This person actually, they weren't even at my workshop. I was just talking about security for like days because honestly, I won't shut up about it. So I got this message from them and they said, you know what? I found my first vulnerability in an application. We were testing an application and I realized that it was sending the password over HTTP. I was like, that's cool. Like, this is not a super complex vulnerability, but the fact that they, after listening to me, thinking that, okay, security is not a big scary thing, actually managed to find a vulnerability in one of the applications they were testing, proved to me that actually this kind of approach can work. And again, it's one fewer thing I need to write in the pen test report. And I want to try and minimize that as much as possible. We've spoken about applications. What about the infrastructure side? Well, once we have infrastructure as code, which is one of the keys to DevOps, we can start to use some of the same tools. We can use the SAS tools to scan our code, infrastructure code. We can compare the configuration files to a good baseline. We can say, we know this service should only have port 80 open or port 443 open or whatever. With the config files that's used to generate that infrastructure, we can make sure that never changes. If it does change, it can be highlighted. It can be highlighted with, and to let the dev or the ops person understand that there's been a change that is against the baseline. If you can't do something like this, there are other options such as using hacking tools like Nmap or Nessus, like we saw before. You can write wrappers around them and try to integrate them into your process, but that's going to have some challenges. Running these tools in a kind of automated way that's quick and easy to pass the results from is harder than more of like the infrastructure as code type of thing. So we've changed our security checks into something that's more like this. Right, so the developer would commit some code to their source code repo, and this will start a build. That build system might check for vulnerable dependencies, right? And then it will run some source code scanning stuff. Maybe the source code scanning will actually run on the developer's box as well. So as they're developing in the IDE, they get instant feedback about any security risks that they're introducing. Dynamic tests might get run. Maybe the dynamic tests only run once a week because they take more time, but they can be run as part of the build system. And only if all these things are successful, the build gets deployed deployed in production. So we have a way of pushing straight to production, which developers want to do. We also have security in place. So now security has become something that can help developers get into production with less risk. It's also repeatable. These checks will happen every time the application gets built. You're not going to have a pen test every time the application gets built. So that worked when we had more of this traditional approach, right? Or as we're trying to move more into something like this. But where does pen testing fit into something that is continuously being deployed? I tried to do pen testing at a company where they had a very agile approach to their development, and they wanted us to pen test their application that changed every week. It was almost impossible. Testing became mostly just doing code reviews, right? To try and see what's changed. How can we try and find some vulnerabilities in this area? Oh, wait, no, the code's changed again. So where does pen testing and things fit into actually this type of thing? Well, what I would say is, remember this side where we said that some applications do require pen testing, which is totally true. I'm going to say something that we probably shouldn't tell our clients as well. And actually, there might be some people in this room that don't necessarily agree with what I'm going to say. And if you don't want to hear, just like it is. But if we have this more automated way of doing testing, where security testing, where we know we have a kind of a known good application that's going into production, we might say that maybe every X deployment or after X number of months or something, then we actually just have a tick box pen test. And I'm a pen tester that's saying that in this case, if all these things are set up, a tick box pen test might be okay. It's going to be cheaper, right? Because it doesn't require as many skills. It's a good way to get new people into security. So it's going to open up a new set of roles where they go in and look for kind of known issues. They're going to say, it's more like a verification to say, okay, we know that these tools have been working correctly and there's been no big changes that the tools haven't picked up or things like that. So it's not about discovering new issues, but manually verifying that everything that you know about is correct. And again, I think this is going to be a real way to kind of change the way that pen testing happens. But also, I think what it would mean is that when the more experienced pen testers come in, they can work in a way that's more like this, right? They can do more of like a red team continuous type of thing where we're not necessarily limited to the scope of one specific application. Instead, we might be monitoring an organization looking for that one weakness that pops up at some point. They can have like an internal security team that's just continually looking at everything and being able to feed that back into the development process. So they find this issue, big deal, not picked up by the tick box pen test or the cheap tick box pen test, not picked up by the tooling. This kind of continuous style of testing would pick that up and then feed that back into the development team where they can fix it. And this is where you'd look for kind of more complex logic issues or new vulns, things that take a bit more understanding of security and kind of more experience in security. And you need to be able to tie that all together. All right, so we have security coming in, not just with pen testing at the end, but we have coming in from the continuous running of the SAS and the DAS tools, coming from the QA testers, and more this red team approach to continuous security as well. And bug bounties might fit into that, and security test cases, and that was all coming into a central database, which Jenkins or the build system is using to decide whether the application should be deployed or not. Because the way it happens currently is a PDF that gets lost in someone's mailbox, and I think this is a way better solution. So I've heard people say to me that won't work. Well, some things they say is you need to be a really elite hacker to find security vulnerabilities, and I think that's not true, right? You don't have to be very skilled in security to find security vulnerabilities. Checking that something is going over HTTP doesn't require lots of skills. Checking whether SQL injection, an application is vulnerable to SQL injection, doesn't necessarily require lots of skills. To understand it and to exploit it and to, take that and leverage and be able to do something kind of cool or something that's, show off the issue might require more experience, but just to detect it or to find it, oftentimes it's just putting a couple of characters into a box and seeing what happens. So automated tests won't find everything. That's true. But I don't find everything either. Honestly, if I've had a bad night's sleep, I might not find some vulnerabilities. If it's a new technology, there will be things I've never seen before. Often I've seen juniors do testing, testing an application, and that's the only pen test that happens. Again, they don't necessarily have the experience to find everything either. So it's okay to not find everything. As long as we can find a lot of things or more things than would happen without running it, without running the automated tests, then we're doing better. Need a pen test to be secure? Well, it's not the pen test that makes you secure, it's fixing the vulnerability. So anything that we can do to increase the number of vulnerabilities we find early, the better position we're going to be in. And the pen test, as I mentioned, is only a point in time. right? So if we have a pen test and they fix everything, that's cool. But a year later, they're going to introduce new vulnerabilities. Unless they have a way of continuously monitoring for those new issues, they're going to be in just a bad position. So that's it. I don't know how much time we got left. 15 minutes, okay.
Yeah,
so
lunch afterwards as well, so you can overrun.
Okay.
If everyone wants to stay, of course.
So yeah, I'm not going to force everyone to stay. So that's it. I want to ask if anyone have any questions. So because we still got a bit of time, so if anyone wants to ask anything, there might be someone. Any question? Yeah.
A diagram where you have all those things feeding into vulnerabilities. What do you do anything to use any tools?
So was that this one?
Yeah. Do you have any kind of vulnerability management?
So yes, there is. There's a really good one. I can't remember its name. It's called ThreadFix or something like that. Okay. So that's like systems like that do exist, and ThreadFix is one that I've used in the past, and I enjoyed it. I thought it made sense. But basically, yeah, it allows you to quite easily write tools that will import into it, and so everything is just in one central place.
Yeah. Do you have a kind of process for feeding those into? So it's like you triage them.
Yeah.
Feed them to the dev teams.
Yeah, I mean, so any way that kind of makes sense for the company. I don't think there's like one answer, really. It depends on how the organization works. So the question is about how these issues then get fed into the dev team. Yeah, it depends on, like, is it a large company? Is it a small company? Is it, a dev heavy, or are they doing other stuff as well? I wish that there's not really one answer. You will design some kind of policy that makes sense for that team. The hard part is really to get the developers to be involved with it. I've worked at places before where, they've brought us in to try to help embed security into what the developers are doing. And the developers, they want to, but also they got stuff to do. And any change is met with resistance, because they just know it's going to take them time to be able to work efficiently. So yeah, where I worked, where we did use ThreadFix, it was really more about, like, this is now the process. That there'll be ThreadFix, and then they get exported to Jira, using Jira, and then it becomes as part of their normal bug handling process. Because one thing that I see a lot is that the PDF goes over to the client of the vulnerabilities, and just no one knows what to do with it. If we can start to treat them as normal bugs, then they just get picked up and they get triaged and rated as they would with other non-security bugs. And I think that's really one of the keys. Everything gets fixed as other bugs.
This is kind of awkward because we live together, but I've never asked you this question, and it's just really prompted it. Because you're an ex-developer, how much do you think that kind of changes the way that you look at security? You seem quite empathetic.
Yeah, I think I am empathetic. I know, because I've been there, where when I was doing my first internship, I was doing development, and I said to my boss, "Hey, I've written this application like you asked me to, but it's got cross-site scripting in." And he's like, "It doesn't matter." I'm like, "What do you mean it doesn't matter? It's like cross-site scripting." He's like, "Yeah, but to use it, you've got to be on this secure network, and there's like 5 users anyway, so just don't worry about it." I'm like, "Oh, okay, that makes sense." And I think ever since then, I've realized that security is not the most important thing. You need to understand the other factors there as well. Security is super important. But if it's on an internal network and you've got to be trusted to get there, then yeah, there's more. There's other things you can do rather than hack some brochureware website.
So you mentioned a lot of different sort of stages, and I really like the way how you presented it, breaking it down into the different areas that need to be tackled in order to integrate this. Mm-hmm. What would you say, though, overall is the biggest barrier, the biggest challenge to actually seeing things like this even in the industry?
Okay, so the question was the biggest barrier to seeing this stuff implemented in the industry. I think infosec, the way that we position security, we always say that, you've got to be super elite to find security issues. I think, well, the work I've done in the past where I've told people that that's not true has been where I've seen the largest impact, where they have the confidence to look for vulnerabilities. I think that's the biggest thing. Like in infosec, sometimes we can be very them and us, and it should be more us, right? We're all, at the end of the day, if I'm hired by a company, I feel like I'm there to help make their product better. I'm not there to tell them that they're wrong or that they can't code or that they suck. It's that I'm here to, you guys do development really well and I do security really well. So we're actually working together to make something good. And I think once you start having a more of like just an us attitude to things, the knowledge starts to change. So security infosec understands more how developers work, and developers understand how security works and the issues that we always talk about. They understand why they're relevant and vice versa.
Do you sort of map the kind of layered approach to security testing to sort of different kind of threat actors and things? So simple script kiddies and things might have been picked up by the sort of first layer of security testing, and then your final kind of like lead hackers might kind of be defended against the kind of lead hackers of nation states and things like that.
So the question was about the layers of...
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether or not you kind of map these kind of like layered security tests into your kind of attacker profiles.
Okay, so I don't really. One thing I try to say is, understand understand what your threat is. You probably don't want an application online that's vulnerable to script kiddies or anything. If you can find a vulnerability by running Burp Suite, other people can do that too. And if that is what your threat is, for some organizations, that's all they're worried about. It's like a 10 person organization where their budget is tiny. Just make sure that that's not going to happen. That's totally fine. Run Burp Suite, get those vulnerabilities fixed, and you're probably fine. If you are more worried about that, you need to do more things. But no, I've never really thought too much about like.
You don't, but we do. We have blue team part of digital interruption. We actually do map the kind of risk analysis. It's just that you're
doing other stuff.
The attacking side, the defensive side does do that.
So it might be better to have might be better for Saskia to answer that question.
Like I really just don't want to interrupt you, but literally our company does that.
Okay. So yes, apparently we do, but not the stuff that I'm necessarily involved with.
Yeah, because you're the other side of it, but that's what makes us a little bit different. Is that we're 360. So we try and secure it, and then you try and break it to see if we've done it properly. Yeah. Any other questions?
How different do you believe security testers? So, for example, in an agile agency, we're obviously working on different projects. As opposed to developing one piece of software. So obviously it's taking more of the time to do it. And obviously take that project.
Yeah.
How do you think things
differs from?
Just in terms of how you test it, really. So obviously you kind of go in cycles.
Yeah.
I don't really know how it works.
So when you're working with applications that you are developing in cycles or you're moving around a lot, really, I think the only thing you can do is to try and automate stuff. Doing any kind of manual testing there becomes really difficult. Like, as I said, when I was brought in to do manual testing at a company that was constantly changing their applications, it was really, really hard. So instead, what they should have focused on is having us work with the testers that they already had, that had the test cases that and a way of testing the applications. We should have been working with them to develop security test cases instead of having us come in to do pen testing on it. So I think that's probably the more sensible approach. If you have a way of doing testing, try and add security into those rather than having like a manual security test. Any other questions?
I was just going to ask you, obviously, you thought about it, so you did interact with a certain amount of what you do already, but how would you find client uptake and acceptance of the new approaches? Because everyone knows pen testing, and it's sort of the same.
Yeah.
I don't know if you find it's difficult to try and understand this new approach or how receptive they're.
Good question. So the question was about how clients react to kind of a new way of doing security stuff. honestly, that is one of the harder things. When we first started Digital Interruption, we actually said, we're not going to do pen testing. We're only going to do this kind of stuff. And that didn't last for very long because a lot of our clients said, oh, but we want a pen test. I'm like, fine, we'll do the pen test. So I think more people need to talk about this. Once it becomes easier to do it this way, then it's going to be adopted. The companies I've worked with where they have tried to do this stuff, the biggest problem was not getting the technology and stuff in place. It was just getting the developers to work in that way. So that's why it needs to become something that's like really embedded with the way that they're doing. So again, with training and with using the tools that they're familiar with. I think what they don't want to do is have like all these new tools that they need to run. If it's stuff that, they're already using Jenkins and Jenkins is already kicking off scans and doing things, then adding another security scan is not really a big deal. Saying here's like this other, here's this other tool you've got to run against it because some pen tester added a GUI to some pen test tool. That becomes an issue. So yeah, there is companies are slowly moving to this idea, but a lot of companies, especially lots of the smaller companies, they're told they need a pen test because their customer has asked for the pen test report, and that's their driver behind security. And for those type of companies, I think it's only ever going to be pen testing. It's the companies that really want to have highly secure applications that might want to look at an approach like this. So yeah, good question. And honestly, it's like when we started, we're like, no, pen testing, we're not going to do it. But yeah. Yeah, exactly. What people to pay.
Yeah.
Anything else? Cool. Thank you very much, guys.